again, needs very little introduction. He's a writer and broadcaster, has been a very prominent left-wing and Labour activist in not only in the Labour movement, also, well, not only in the Labour Party, but also the trade union movement. So I'm very pleased to pass on to Paul Mason now. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you for that, Gareth. So to be brief, and thanks to the speakers, I come from a working class town in Britain called Lee. And poor as my grandfather and great-grandfather were, we have to acknowledge that they would have been even poorer had not Britain exploited China as an imperialist power at the point of a gun. And as a white English person, I will always preface any criticism of the CCP with that acknowledgement. But it wasn't imperialism that imposed the 1997 withdrawal agreement that has now been broken. It was a voluntary agreement, and the reason the then leadership of the Chinese Communist Party entered it, in part, was to broaden their access, not just to the global market, but to the international system that underpins that global market. Now, we as a party helped to create that international system. We may be critical of it, and we are critical of it, but we understand the benefits of a rules-based multilateral order in which differences can be expressed through platforms that are common. And indeed, where conflicts take place, they can be mediated. And the problem we have as British socialists with what the National People's Congress Standing Committee did this year is that it unilaterally rips up an agreement, and it unilaterally changes something important to us. Now, what is important to us are not simply abstract ideals of freedom and democracy, but the freedom and democracy of Chinese workers to struggle for their daily existence. The USA, on the 20th of May, made a declaration that China is now a systemic rival to America, and it says they have given up on the idea that economic development will bring democracy to China. You know, the theory that a rising middle class wants greater freedom, greater diversity. I have not given up on that. In fact, I have been, I think it's 6 times to China, twice to Hong Kong, to report centrally in my work the rise of an alternative labor movement in China. And I can tell you that neither the CCP nor Chinese society are not monoliths. The CCP itself contains many factions, many differences about the future development path of China. But more or less all of them exclude what we want, which is the development of workers' freedom to organize at the point of production in trade unions that are not organized by the government and under constant surveillance and suppression by the state. Now, I think with the development of a more educated and networked working class, 250 million migrant workers working with virtually no rights, making everything I'm wearing today, my Apple Watch, the microphone I'm speaking to you through, the computer, there is every chance that they, through self-organization, can find a voice. 2018, the JASIC strike. Before that, the Foxconn strike. Wave after wave of strikes. Now, it may not be obvious to those who have not been, but the Chinese border with Hong Kong is porous. It is porous physically, and it is porous politically. We know that after the 2014 umbrella movement, there was an immediate resonance in the factories of Guangdong province, where workers in those factories, yes, they are organizing for their economic rights. But let's remember what those economic rights consist of or don't consist of. Workers at Foxconn were required to sign a contract stating that they would not commit suicide because the work conditions were so bad that so many of them committed suicide. I have met independent labor organizers in Guangdong, in Shenzhen. I have met the people in Hong Kong, mainly students, mainly people involved on the left and the democracy movement who are actively supporting them. So it's not just, of course, it is the fact that for the CCP, It sees this semi-democratic system in Hong Kong, whereas Lee says you can't even have the right to strike, but you have the right to think about going on strike. It's not just a symbolism, because their mythology is that the Chinese people as a people don't want democracy and couldn't cope with it if they had it. Hong Kong is an affront to that illusion, but it's also a material thing that the Hong Kong left and labor movement can and does support the left and the independent workers movement in China itself. My own work, my book, 2007 book, Live Working or Die Fighting, circulates as a PDF inside mainland China, with the bit about June 4th, 1989 taken out of it, because students in Hong Kong voluntarily translated it and circulated directly to the workers' circles. You know, and for that, I'm incredibly grateful for that. But, you know, it is an example of what they don't like. Finally, our solidarity matters. Xi Jinping thinks he is a Marxist. Xi Jinping is quoting Engels. As a Marxist, you know, I can tell Xi Jinping that Marxists do not repress independent working class organizations. And when I met some of the independent trade unionists, I'd met them in Shenzhen in 2008-9. I met them in 2018. I'm sorry to say their space for activity had been closed down, where they could once operate from a center with formal trade unions and legal representation. Now they operate mainly as cultural NGOs, making wickerwork baskets to keep the peasant, to keep the migrant workers' culture alive. That's not the action of a Marxist. Our solidarity matters, but let me finish on one thing. Every voice inside the British Labour movement that stands up to say Xi Jinping is an anti-imperialist, so we should support the communists, that says that the democracy protesters in Hong Kong are fascists. We've heard this, I'm afraid, from the Morning Star newspaper, that they're right-wingers, anti-democrats. This helps maintain the power of a fully authoritarian state, a state that is, it's not fascist, I'm not saying it, but it's just as authoritarian as Mussolini's Italy was, and probably more so, more because it can do surveillance through the cell phones. So I'm totally welcome what Stephen is saying. I welcome what our Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has been saying. I think we need to look at Magnitsky sanctions carefully. There are 2,500 members of the National People's Congress. 6 of them abstained on the new law. 1 voted against. 2,500 more or less voted for it. They have people, they have families studying in British universities. They are buying, you know, skyscraper apartment blocks here in London. Well, let's think about how great it would be to strike a blow for the freedom of the Hong Kong working class and left, to be able to say to them, some of those people, you no longer have the right to operate in the West, to build your millions and billions as a princeling of the Communist Party. We can do that. And that's something that I would do even in alliance with the Tories, because yes, they're xenophobic, yes, they're following Trump's agenda, but we do have the right to try and persuade China back to where we were. Let's face it, it may be all we can achieve is to go back away from the national security law, back to a situation where there is relatively more freedom. The full struggle for freedom in Hong Kong and in the PRC remains a long, strategic struggle. Thank you.